Your taxpayer dollars should never be used to erode your right to keep and bear arms. Hey everyone, Toby Leary here, chairman of the Civil Rights Coalition, the ballot committee that was formed to repeal Chapter 135 of the Acts of 2024. A lot of you don't even know what that is. Hopefully I'm here to educate you on that. But first, I would like to address some concerns I have about the opposition group and what they're saying about Chapter 135. I feel like there's a lot of really good and well-intentioned people who just want to reduce violence in their communities, reduce negative outcomes with firearms, and I would be happy to stand side by side with anyone, anytime, any place who wants to sit down and have a real conversation about results that we could obtain through common sense efforts. However, it seems a lot of people have an agenda, and that is to remove, replace, amend, whatever you want to call it, the Second Amendment. That is a constitutionally enumerated right that should never be so easily eroded by a simple majority vote at the State House. And I think you all would agree that that should be the case for all of our enumerated rights. It should never be able to be changed or manipulated based on a majority vote of elected officials. Our founding fathers paid a steep price to enshrine those rights in the Constitution. However, I do want to address a couple of those issues that are on the website. So it says right here, how does the current law keep Massachusetts safe? This legislation, an act modernizing firearms laws, number one, regulates untraceable ghost guns for the first time. Well, ironically, the phrase ghost guns doesn't even appear in the 116-page bill that was passed through really questionable methods, and also an emergency preamble was signed to make sure that the law could not be suspended. Ghost guns, if they were that important of an issue, and this is a made-up propaganda term, by the way, our founding fathers fought the Revolutionary War with ghost guns. They basically mean they didn't have a serial number, or they were manufactured by local or personal people for defensive purposes. And this is a freedom hobby that's happened and occurred in our country for 251 years at the very least, and before that. So this could have been done as a separate piece of legislation if it was that much of an issue that you needed to address. But the problem with Chapter 135 is it's an omnibus bill. It's 116 pages of firearm regulation that only affect the people who are trying to do the right thing. So nefarious individuals are still going to get untraceable firearms and still going to use them to go on and do unscrupulous things. So that's my answer to that. You could have done it as a separate bill, as legislation, or you could also acknowledge that we don't need to regulate the person who's trying to comply with all the laws, the licensed individual who wants to partake in a freedom hobby. What you should address is the violent criminal element. Maybe make it so they go to jail longer for acts of violence with guns that are untraceable. Just throwing that out there. There's lots of ways you could deter criminal activity with a firearm. Number two, strengthens the Commonwealth's firearm licensing laws. Now this is just a bald-faced lie. There's nothing about this that strengthens firearms licensing laws. That is actually a dog whistle for makes it harder for you, the peaceful, lawful citizen, to exercise a constitutional right. That's all it is. In a nutshell, it increases the financial burden, it increases the time commitment, and it increases the requirements that you already had to do. You already had to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. We have one of the most strict gun control regimes in the country prior to Chapter 135. You had to present yourself to the local PD, give an interview. In some cases, you had to take a mandatory government required class, pay a fee for that class. Then you had to go into the local licensing authority, get fingerprinted and photographed as if you were being booked. Then you had to have your name run to the Department of Criminal Justice Information Services. You had to be maintained in that database, and then your property would be registered in that database. No other constitutional right requires any of those situations in order to enact or to exercise that right. Imagine if they wanted to maintain you in the Department of Criminal Justice Information Services in order to give a speech at the local library or at the local university, or to write a letter to the editor, or to go to church on Sunday. We would all say, no, that's a bridge way too far. How about we concentrate on the criminals and not the lawful, because that seems like a more efficient use of everybody's time, effort, and energy. However, this law does make it a lot more burdensome to exercise your constitutional rights, and that's by design. It's not strengthening. It doesn't make us safer as a community to make good people have to do extra things in order to exercise a constitutional right. Number 3, updates and expands our extreme risk protection order laws to better prevent suicides and mass shootings. This has already been abused since Chapter 135 has been signed into law. These extreme risk protection orders, or another way of saying it is a restraining order, and they've made it so anybody pretty much can get an extreme risk protection order. Now, this is already backfiring for people like Samuel Lacus out of East Springfield, who found himself on the fraudulent end of a restraining order, and the person who accused him of nefarious activity didn't show up for the hearing. But in the meantime, the police show up at his door, they take his license to carry, they seize all of his guns that he lawfully and legally purchased, and then they proceed to charge him with infractions that they say he hasn't done, like the registration requirement under Chapter 135, even though the state says you have until October to register all your firearms. So here he is facing severe felonies. This is a student in a university who's on the dean's list, and his whole life is about to be ruined by the strengthening of our extreme risk protection orders. And unfortunately, there's zero teeth to the person who fraudulently takes out one of these extreme risk protection orders. And to make matters worse, I personally have been called by healthcare professionals who now can get an extreme risk protection order by a court on their word. I've been called by them about a serious concern of a violent and potentially suicidal individual, and they weren't willing to breach that confidentiality between patient and professional. They said that's a bridge too far for us. We would be violating the HIPAA laws. We would be violating our confidentiality if we're the ones who have to go out and seek an extreme risk protection order for somebody who could be a violent individual. So I would love to sit down at the table and figure out how we can effectively reduce the threat of suicides and people who could potentially be a threat. But the truth of the matter is there's already mechanisms that exist. We didn't need Chapter 135 to do this. In all 50 states, if somebody was a bona fide threat to themselves or others, police would take action. In all 50 states. This does nothing except make it easier for fraudulent claims against good people and eliminates 250 years of due process. Due process is something that holds the fabric of our society together. If you can be charged or have your rights violated or your property seized and your rights taken away on the word of somebody else, we have in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution things like you have a right to confront your accuser. You have a right to be deemed innocent until proven guilty. And the script has been flipped with the extreme risk protection order in Massachusetts. Number 4 seeks to identify expanded funding opportunities for community violence intervention. And this really is a self-perpetuating enumerated thing on the website, because this group gets taxpayer funds to study the effects of gun violence in our communities. Basically, it gives them money to go out and try to erode your constitutionally enumerated rights. There's no other way around it. In fact, They were granted $290,000 by Andrea Campbell's office, and they are an NGO. They're getting taxpayer funds, and 30 days later, they formed Yes for a Safe MA, the ballot committee that formed to oppose the repeal of Chapter 135. We've looked at the financials at the end of the year report, and you can see a lot of in-kind donations going back and forth from Yes for a Safe MA and the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. Frankly, that is a conflict of interest. Your taxpayer dollars should never be used to erode your right to keep and bear arms. This video is getting long. If you've stayed to the end so far, please like and subscribe and share this with someone who's on the fence, someone who's not really a stakeholder in gun ownership, but is definitely interested in preserving the American way of life as far as the Constitution is concerned, and share it. And we will see you on November 3rd. I'm going to do a part 2 of this video because I think it's worth it. So stay tuned and we'll see you soon.